There seems to be a measles explosion going on. And a lot of people will tell you it's all related to what's happening in the United States with RFK and the people being anti vax and them not being up to date with their measles. And this is the problem. Now, there's no doubt that this is a part of the picture because the vaccination rates have dropped globally and certainly in certain parts of the United States. But what I'm arguing today is that this is far more significant and far more serious than what we're being put across. Now, what you will see in the news is a headline like this. This was on the 29th of December, the year measles came back. Doctors reflecting on how the virus's resurgence has affected their patients in 2025. And they're showing you here a child getting a measles vaccine, possibly. And they're emphasizing the fact that in this period of time, it's one of the highest number of cases, 1,900 at this point, had been diagnosed. And in the article, they talk about the fact that RFK was waffling about with regards to cod liver oil. So Secretary RFK waffled on about the value of vaccines while touting unproven treatments like cod liver oil. And they're talking about the low vaccinated regions and the problem that they're having that less and less people are trusting the scientific experts. Part of that problem comes from the fact that they are not being rigorous and they're not being completely truthful. And this is a challenge, is that sometimes you just have to be honest. It's what we call the duty of candor. We normally have to do it in medicine where we have to say what's going on and give reasons for why. So I'm going to be explaining to you what I think is happening. So this is important for you to understand. This is my perspective, and I'll be showing you what is being said in relation to the WHO and in relation to Europe as well. So the first thing that you have to understand is I'm getting some of this data from the CDC, measles cases and outbreaks, and they're looking at what happened in terms of 2025. I'm going to come to that in a moment, but I think it's important to note that this is not just a USA problem. And when you look carefully, you'll realize that in Europe, the European Union reported the highest number of measles cases in more than 25 years. And this was March 2025. 127,000 cases in the 2024 region, double from 2023. Now, vaccination, immigration is going to be part of this, but it's not the whole picture. And what's happening is, therefore, that people are only focusing on that and not saying what I call the elephant in the room. Why is it across the world? Canada is having a similar problem. Europe is having a similar problem. The United States is having a similar problem. Cases are surging globally with the WHO. They have identified it with measles. It's what I had predicted some time ago, what I call the double whammy. May be inconvenient for people to think about, but this is exactly the point. We are having two viruses circulating, which both impact on the immune system, causing a degree of immune problems. Now, you have to understand why this is so significant. And this is why I devoted a whole presentation to measles and what was happening and why I thought this was such a significant thing, because it's an extremely contagious virus. And it induces what we call immune amnesia. That means that after an infection, it's like it wipes the immune memory. So whatever immunity you had before, it forgets. Strangely, strangely, this is one of the things that could actually have been beneficial. I remember I was talking about it when I spoke with Gert at one point, is that in effect, by doing that, maybe we can make some people's immune system forget focusing on the Wuhan spike protein. That could be beneficial. But this, as I said, is part of the problem. So let's think about what really is happening. First, in terms of the United States, just to make sense of what they are seeing. When they are looking at numbers, you have to then see by what the numbers look like. This is how it's looking at the moment. You can see here by month, you can see the cases are low, and this is in 2023. There was a little bit of a surge in 2024, and then you see a big surge in 2025. Now, what's being put across to you is that this is circulating in the unvaccinated community, and they are right. It is visibly circulating in the unvaccinated community, but I think the bigger picture is much more serious than that. Here's what you have to look at in order to make sense of it. This is the picture of the United States, and it's showing you where is affected in terms of numbers. You can see Texas had the highest number, 800 in throughout the year. New Mexico had 100. Arizona 187, Utah 142. These are states beside each other. There are some cases that had none, Mississippi, North Carolina, and some of them are relatively highly vaccinated in the context that when you look at the numbers, and just so that you can get some symmetry here, I've gotten them side by side, is that what they would be arguing is that, say, for instance, Alabama, which is 97.5%, Mississippi, sorry, 97.5% vaccinated, is therefore going to have less zero cases. Now, you can see here North Carolina, 0 cases. When you go across, you can see actually they're only 93.8% vaccinated. So it's not straightforward. That is purely down to the vaccination levels. Even Texas is 94.3% vaccinated and has the highest number of cases. But as I said, this is a countrywide phenomenon. Now, you have to take it back a little bit to make sense of the previous years, because sometimes looking at that doesn't show the full picture. In 2019, they had also a surge, and you can see it here. This is 2000, the present, the year 2000, going along all the way to 2010. In 2011, 220 cases, 2014, 667, 2019, 1274. Now, you can see that 2025, 2012 is the highest it has been. This here was an outbreak primarily in 2 states that carried the bulk of it. So in reality, the numbers are much closer to 2018 if you take out those 2 states. This one is countrywide. That is what is different. And what they're not asking properly is this purely down to vaccination status in terms of in to what I've explained before. So when we look at what happens in terms of measles, and you can see it here, if this will come up, yes, you can see here mucosal layer, and normally the virus is blocked, or normally it has to infect this layer, get past the immune defense, and then get into the bloodstream in order to spread, in order to cause symptoms with regards to measles. And it has a specific timeline in terms of the time before this incubation period where the infection occurs, it's then spreading, then you end up with the rash, the cough, the temperature, and so on. And this is the timeline of measles. Now, what seems to be relevant here, or what is important to understand with regards to this measles, is how measles actually infects. Now, it does 2 things. As I showed you, it infects the upper airways here, say for instance, in the nasopharyngeal region, infects there, but in order to get out, it comes out through the lungs. Now, this is important because it's using 2 different locations. That means it has to spread in the blood to get to the lungs to get out. And that circle of infection is very important because, in theory, what should happen is that the immune system is able to block the circulation of the virus, even if it broke through mucosal defense, and therefore prevent circulation after that. That would be the idea. clearly, this is not happening. And this is where it's tied in to COVID. So when you have a depleted COVID situation after an infection where all of these immune cells are being suppressed, and this is probably one of the most serious parts about COVID, suddenly you have a situation where the immune system is struggling to cope with other viruses, measles included, one of the most infectious viruses around. That is what I think is happening. And here's the problem, because why would they not want to acknowledge that, you may ask? Why would they not just say, listen, we're having a situation here where the population is a bit further immune suppressed, and therefore they are less likely to control any viral infection, including measles? The reason it's hard to acknowledge is because you would then have to say which cohort are likely to have this immune suppression combination of infection after reinfection after reinfection. The truth is that based on the extrapolation of the science, it is more likely to be the cohort who have been elephantized, if you can read between the lines. That would then mean that they would have to acknowledge that problem. Nobody wants to go there. And so we have a situation where it is easier to pretend that it is simply the fact that people are choosing not to get their MMR vaccine, and this is the reason why it is spreading so avidly. Remember, when I show you this map of the United States as to where it is located, this is broadly across the USA. And what is unlikely to be happening is that it's purely unvaccinated communities spreading it all through the whole of the United States. Here is where it is a problem, because what I suspect is happening is that we are having a situation where it is being spread not just by the unvaccinated, but by a cohort of the vaccinated cohort. And this is very important. Now, this is not speculation, because we know already when we look at the cases in 2025, when you look at the vaccination status, 93% were unvaccinated or unknown. But we know that 7% had at least one MMR dose. And what you're looking at here is a cohort of the population who had obvious clinical measles, meaning they had a rash. My argument is that suppose you only have 7% with a rash, but in reality, subclinical spread is occurring among 15%. This is now where you have this situation that you have wide and broad spread of the virus in a way that doesn't seem to make sense, because it's not the unvaccinated spreading it to other unvaccinated people. That's when you have a localized outbreak. What I'm showing you here is a countrywide outbreak. This is not just a concentration other than in Texas. This is all the way across the United States. Who is spreading this? And I think this is a very important point. They should be looking carefully at looking for subclinical spread of measles, especially among adults, because the presentation of disease is unlikely to be the same with children. They may not get a rash. If you look carefully at the symptoms, and this is where you have to go back to the symptoms, I'm going to show you, you just have to imagine this point in order to make sense of what is going on. I'm trying to get the correct slide here so that you can see the breakdown of all the symptoms. When you look at the symptoms with regards to it, just imagine you don't have the couple of spots in the mouth. There is no obvious rash, but you have a sniffly nose, a cough, a little bit of red eyes, and temperature. How is somebody going to know that this is still measles without the rash? This could be anything, including COVID. And suddenly we have a problem where you have viral infection occurring and spreading, and no one is aware. This is why I think this is so serious. it's putting everyone at risk. The question is, what do you do? One, this is one of those times where, in reality, if you are a parent, you really have to think seriously about if your child is unvaccinated against measles. Certain parts of the world, you can't get just a measles vaccine. You'd have to use the MMR. And so the point is, if they haven't had it already, this is one of those times where the MMR makes a lot of sense because so many people are likely to be circulating this. And although a lot of children don't get severely unwell, this could still be a risk. Additionally, when we think about what was said in terms of the previous situation with RFK, he made an important point. And I think that it has been ridiculed simply because it doesn't fit the narrative. And what he had said is that people should take cod liver oil. And the reason this is relevant is simply because it has a good source of vitamin A. Cod liver oil, 1,350 micrograms in cod liver oil. The highest is in beef liver, 21,000. So if you can, I used to get fed liver as a child, so I realize now the value of it. But the point is that what it does is that it adds an extra layer of protection to the mucosa. It makes it better able to defend itself. And if you remember what happened in COVID, where people were discouraged from taking vitamin D, and it made no sense. Why would you discourage anyone from taking vitamin D, especially if they are deficient or in a temperate climate where they're not getting enough sun exposure? It makes no sense. Don't discourage them. In the same way, whilst vitamin A is not going to prevent measles, it will certainly, whether or not a child is vaccinated, improve their mucosal immunity. And so therefore reduce the risk whether or not they've been vaccinated for subclinical infection. The same applies for the adults. If you are parents and you are concerned about that, one of the simplest ways to improve the levels of vitamin A, but you have to remember it's a fat-soluble vitamin, so you can take too much of it. But good old-fashioned strategies, if you're old enough to remember your grandparents giving you a spoon or a capsule of cod liver oil, that made perfect sense then, and it probably makes perfect sense now. But the fundamental principle is that what we have here is what I call a double whammy. Circulating COVID, circulating measles, both of them causing immune amnesia. This is a recipe for disaster, not just in children, but in adults as well. And this, in my view, is an example of one of those hidden issues that is going to come out from the side and cause us great difficulty if we don't act on it. There is still certainly a role for people who haven't been vaccinated against measles to have it, especially if you've got children or even if you're an adult. If you haven't had it, it makes sense. But there is also an important role for everybody to participate in improving their immunity, because this is what is happening now. If it's happening in the US, I suspect it's happening all over the world. This surge, based on my prediction with the immune system, is going to rise year on year. It's not going to come down. And it's not simply just about the fact that they are unvaccinated. That is my view. And that's what, in my idea, the science tells us. This is far more significant. And we don't have acknowledgement for it, which means that it only compounds the problem. Everybody has a role to play here. And what we can't afford to do is get into narrative-based science. Narrative-based science tells you that you only follow what fits. No, everybody needs to look deeper than that and make sure we are all part of the solution. Have a great evening.
A hero, an immune adventure. Humming Heroes, your lyrical guide to the body's defenders. Now on Amazon. Check the links below.